He was a serial killer who bragged about killing people, and he professed and confessed to be a demon.
He was that, bruh. If he wanted you out of there, he'll go do it himself on feet by himself.
Von gave me a lot of passes. He could have killed me a couple times.
I was happy as hell when I found out Von was dead. I cooked for the whole day.
I was relieved for the community, man, because he was over there torturing them guys, man.
This is the story of Walter Silk Bennett, a name that carried so much weight on the streets of Chicago that even nearly 2 decades after his death, the real truth about his life is still buried under layers of mystery. Silk was the father of King Von, and according to those who knew them both, his presence in the streets was even more intense than the reputation his son would later build. But what makes this story hit different is what happens when you actually start digging into the records. The second you try to verify the legends, something feels off. The man behind all the stories barely shows up in official documentation. No clear court files, no major news coverage surrounding his death, no easily traceable police reports. What's left are just a handful of confirmed facts. King Von's own words about his father, and a long list of street stories that may or may not hold up. So today, we're breaking it down, separating what's real from what's rumor, focusing only on what can actually be confirmed about Silk, along with what King Von himself said about the man who shaped him. And we're also keeping it real, about where the verified information ends and the mythology begins, because that line is what makes this story hit even harder. Let's start with the facts we can actually confirm about Walter Edward Bennett. He was born on October 28, 1974, in Cook County and lived for 30 years before his death. On July 31, 2005, his dates come from the Social Security Death Index and a Find a Grave memorial that clearly identifies him as King Von's father. That same memorial confirms another key detail. Silk was cremated and never had a gravestone placed. So any photos circulating online claiming to show his grave are simply inaccurate. His street name was Silk, sometimes referred to as Ada Park Silk. That nickname traces back to the Ada neighborhood, also known as Sawyer Garrett Park, in the Morgan Park area on Chicago's south side. This is completely separate from Parkway Gardens, in Greater Grand Crossing, the area known as O-Block where King Von grew up. Silk wasn't from O-Block at all. His ties were rooted in Ada Park instead. Ada Park has long been associated with a faction connected to the Black Disciples, and this is where a lot of online information gets mixed up. Silk was affiliated with the Black Disciples, not the Gangster Disciples. And those are two very different organizations with their own histories and structures. King Von's mother was Natasha Chambers, also known as Tessa, and she largely raised Von on her own because Silk spent much of his life going in and out of prison. Sources, including Wikipedia, state that Silk had at least 6 children, meaning Von had several half-siblings, including Caleb Beath, a social media personality many viewers already recognize, along with young Bogo Skog and Louis V. The relationship between Tessa and Silk was reportedly complicated from the start, with ongoing tension over his absence from the family, but there's one detail here that really changes how you look at everything. King Von didn't actually meet his father until he was around 8 years old, sometime around 2002. That's when their relationship truly began, and only about 3 years with his father before Silk was killed. That means the man whose name would later shape so much of Von's identity was barely present in his life at all. King Von was born on August 9, 1994, and his father died on July 31, 2005, leaving Von just 10 years old, only 9 days away from turning 11. Accounts describe their relationship carefully, noting that Von's connection with his father stayed inconsistent because of Silk's repeated incarcerations. By the time Von was nearing his 11th birthday, his father had already been taken by an unknown gunman. 3 years, that's all they really had. And somehow, Silk's influence still ended up shaping almost everything about who Von would become. We know that because of Von's own words. The clearest primary source about who Silk really was comes from King Von's Instagram, where he once posted a tribute later archived by the Netline. In that message, Von called his father the definition of real and said Silk taught him everything he knew about street life, from choosing your circle carefully to the most important rule of all, loyalty. Von referred to Silk as Ada Park's finest and made it clear that when it came to being solid, loyal, and stand-up, Silk set the bar. He closed the post by saying he missed his father, that the streets and his kids missed him too, and ended with the line that Chicago hasn't been the same since Silk left and never will be. Those were Von's own words, laying out exactly what his father meant to him, painting a picture built on street wisdom, discipline in who you trust, and loyalty above everything. The most direct musical tribute to Silk shows up in the X-Bossing Me remix that Von recorded with Memo 600 in January 2019. In that verse, he shouts out Silk from Ada Park and calls him the older version of himself. That line carries serious weight because Von isn't just paying respect, he's framing Silk as a reflection of who he believed he was becoming, the older me. It shows how Von saw his own identity, not just carrying his father's memory, but continuing his legacy in real time. There's also been talk online about a deleted verse from Von's track Where I'm From, which later appeared on his posthumous 2022 album, What It Means to Be King. A few TikTok accounts have claimed Von broke down crying during the session and couldn't finish recording that version. But the truth is, that verse has never surfaced publicly, and the official release doesn't mention Silk at all. So that part of the story remains unverified. Another rumor that's been floating around 4 years claims King Von had blood ties to David Barksdale, the founder of the Black Disciples. The theory usually connects back to the nickname grandson that Von carried, but Von himself cleared up where that name really came from during an interview with 16 Shot 10 Visuals back in October 2018, while he was locked up. Older inmates started calling him grandson because something about him reminded them of King David. These were men who had actually been around when Barksdale was still alive, and they saw traits in Von that echoed the founder himself. What that really says about Silk's legacy is important. Older Black Disciples recognized in Von the same kind of presence that had built Silk's reputation, but that connection was about character, not blood. And there's one simple fact that shuts down the theory of any family link to David Barksdale. Barksdale died in September 1974, and Silk was born in October of that same year. For Von to be Barksdale's grandson, Silk would have had to be his son, and the timeline makes that impossible. No matter how you break it down, the math just doesn't add up. This is where the confirmed facts start to fade and street lore begins to take over. July 31st, 2005 marks the day Walter Silk Bennett was killed in Chicago at just 30 years. Old Wikipedia uses careful wording, stating he was killed by an unseen gunman. The Netline, citing King Von's uncle, offers a more detailed version, claiming Silk was hit by a sniper tied to a rival gang. But outside of that, there's nothing in the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, or any other local outlet. No police reports, no court filings tied to the case show up in any public database. No suspect has ever been publicly identified, and the case appears to have quietly gone cold. Two main narratives about Silk's death have circulated online for years, but neither one has ever been confirmed through any official source. The sniper story usually gets told like this. Silk was allegedly shot from a distance outside a skating rink because his reputation made it too risky for anyone to get close. According to the story, whoever wanted him gone had to rely on a lot. Some versions claim he survived the initial shot but later died on the operating table days later. Other variations go even further, suggesting the hit was tied to the Gangster Disciples. The second version tells a different story entirely. In that narrative, Silk's death was retaliation connected to a drug dispute, with claims that he took a large amount of product from someone who eventually came back looking for revenge. What really stands out, though, is the complete lack of news coverage. Shakar recorded over 450 homicides in 2005, and while not every case made headlines, a figure with a reputation like Silk supposedly being taken out by a sniper would normally at least get mentioned somewhere. The fact that there's no coverage at all raises serious questions about how much of these more dramatic versions are actually true. It's important to address what we simply don't know, because that gap matters when trying to understand Silk's full story. No specific charges, convictions, case numbers, or prison records connected to him show up in any public database search. Multiple sources repeat that he spent much of his life going in and out of prison, and the fact that Von didn't meet him until he was 8 supports that pattern. But the details of what he was charged with, where he served time, or how long he was actually locked up remain completely undocumented in any records that can be accessed today. Claims that he ranked among the richest and most powerful figures in Ada Park, or that he controlled a major drug operation, mostly trace back to fan-made YouTube documentaries and content aggregation pages, rather than anything verifiable. There are no confirmed body counts or clearly documented violent acts tied to Silk in any credible reporting. The title of this video frames Silk as more dangerous than King Von, and that idea reflects the mythology built around him and how people who knew both men have described the father. But when it comes to documented facts and official records, there's nothing that actually confirms that claim at the same time. The lack of documentation doesn't automatically mean the stories are false. Chicago in the 1990s and early 2000s wasn't a place where every street figure left behind a clean paper trail. Just because records don't exist doesn't mean Silk wasn't exactly who people say he was. What it does mean is that a clear line has to be drawn between what can be proven and what survives, only through stories passed down over time. There are a few places where Silk's family has spoken about him directly. King Von's uncle appears to be the main source behind the sniper narrative, showing up in the Netline's reporting and across several TikTok videos discussing Silk's death. Von's mother Tasha also appears in a TikTok clip speaking about both Von and his father, and that video has pulled in over 20,000 likes, but no full transcript of what she said has ever been published in written form. Quotes from Silk himself don't exist in any documented archive. His death came in 2005. Years before social media became widespread, and long before YouTube became the massive record-keeping platform it is today. No interviews, no recorded statements, no written material connected to him have ever surfaced. Everything known about Silk comes from what others have said about him. Just days before his own death in November 2020, King Von sat down with Ak for what would become his final interview and spoke about family and how loss impacted it. He explained that his family used to stay close before his grandmother passed away, gathering at her house regularly because she was the one holding everyone together. In another conversation with DJ Akademis, Von also spoke about the constant awareness he carried everywhere he went. Long before rap, he had already learned to move carefully, always watching his surroundings, questioning whether that kind of hypervigilance ever really fades once money and fame enter the picture. That mindset, the constant need to stay alert, came from the environment he grew up in and from the lessons his father passed down. Silk taught him about the streets, about loyalty, and about never letting his guard down. And those lessons stayed with Von all the way until the night gunfire took his life in Atlanta, on November 6, 2020. Strip away the mythology and focus only on what can actually be verified. And that's when this story hits the hardest. A father who spent most of his life locked up finally meets his son when the boy turns 8. They only get 3 years together. And in those 3 years, the father passes down everything he knows. Loyalty above everything. Be careful who you let into your circle. Understand how the streets really operate. Gunfire takes that father when the son is just 10 years old. Only 9 days before his 11th birthday, that same boy grows up to become one of the most successful drill rappers Chicago has ever seen. He builds his identity around his father's memory, calling Silk the older version of himself in his music and carrying that reputation into every room he steps into. 15 years after his father's death, that same son is the one catching bullets in Atlanta. On November 6, 2020, King Von was 26 years old. Silk lived to 30, Von only made it to 26. Neither father nor son made it to see 35. The full truth about Walter Silk Bennett may remain buried for good. The documentation around him is thin, limited to his name, his birth and death dates, his connection to Ada Park, the children he left behind, his cremation, and the fact that he died from gunfire. Everything beyond those details exists somewhere, between oral history and street mythology that no one has been able to fully verify. In a way that might fit exactly who he was. Silk moved through a world where reputation traveled faster than paperwork, where stories carried more weight than records, and where the truth didn't always leave behind proof. And maybe that's why, even now, years later, his name still carries the kind of mystery that keeps people asking questions, that rarely kept records. Street figures from that era were moving long before social media turned every moment into permanent content. The only reason many people even know his name today is because his son rose to fame and made sure the name Silk would never fade away. What can actually be confirmed is simple. King Von loved his father deeply. 3 years was all the time they ever shared, but those 3 years shaped nearly every part of the man Von would become. Von once called Silk the definition of real, and said his father taught him loyalty, about choosing the right people, and about surviving in the streets. Von saw himself as a continuation of his father, the older version carried into a new generation. Whether Silk's reputation as someone even more dangerous than King Von is literally true, or just a legend that grew stronger every time it was told, nobody can say for sure. What is certain is that Von believed it fully, and he spent his entire career trying to live up to that image. The streets of Chicago haven't been the same since Silk left. Those were Von's own words. 15 years later, when Von was killed in Atlanta, that same line could just as easily be said about him. 2 generations, the same streets, and the same ending. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think about the story of Silk. And if there are other Chicago figures you want broken down with facts, separated from mythology, leave those names below. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.